Have you ever quietly wondered why intimacy, once so natural in the early stages of a relationship, can feel so distant as the years go by? Why some couples, even into their later years, still hold hands in public, share private jokes, and maintain an affectionate bond, while others slowly drift apart, becoming more like polite roommates than passionate partners? This question touches more than just physical closeness. It points to something deeper, something that stirs in the heart and lingers in the silence between words. We live in a world that often tells us intimacy is about appearance, performance, or effort. The media shouts promises of rekindling passion through makeovers, exotic vacations, or new routines in the bedroom. But beneath these surface-level suggestions lies a quieter, more profound truth, one often overlooked, yet powerfully reaffirmed by those who have truly lived it. In this story, we explore the wisdom of a 92-year-old woman who has seen love through its youthful bloom, its maturing patience, and the quieter decades that follow. Her insights are not based on theory or trends, but on life itself, on what truly sustains connection between two people after the excitement of new love fades and real life sets in. This isn't just about romance, nor is it solely about physical affection. It's about emotional closeness, the sense that you are seen, heard, valued, and safe in the presence of another human being. For women especially, physical intimacy cannot be separated from this emotional foundation. And when that foundation weakens, desire fades, not because love is gone, but because emotional safety has been quietly lost. Today, we will unpack that emotional truth with clarity and compassion. You'll discover why many women eventually withdraw from intimacy, even if they still love their partner. You'll also learn how seemingly small daily actions, spoken words, thoughtful gestures, and intentional listening can reignite desire in ways that are both natural and enduring. Most importantly, this journey is not about changing who you are or working harder. It is about understanding the emotional landscape of your relationship and choosing to walk it more mindfully, more kindly, and more deeply. Whether you're just a few years into marriage or several decades along, this is an invitation to rediscover something beautiful, the kind of intimacy that feels effortless because it grows from emotional truth. It is a common belief that physical intimacy between partners is driven primarily by attraction or pleasure. While those elements certainly play a role, they represent only the outermost layer of a much deeper emotional experience, especially for women. To understand female desire in a long-term relationship, one must look beyond surface-level assumptions and begin examining the emotional foundation that supports it. For most women, intimacy is not simply a matter of physical impulse. It is, more accurately, a reflection of how emotionally connected and secure she feels with her partner. In fact, many of the most intimate moments, like a gentle touch, a lingering look, or a softly spoken word, are born from emotional warmth, not just physical chemistry. This is why a woman may willingly give herself fully, even in older age, not because of obligation or habit, but because she feels truly seen, valued, and safe. The act of closeness becomes an extension of emotional trust. When that trust is nurtured, intimacy flows naturally. When it is neglected, even the deepest love can grow quiet. What's often misunderstood is that this emotional trust is not built on major declarations or romantic milestones. Rather, it grows through subtle, everyday interactions. A shared laugh, a knowing glance, a feeling that her presence matters without needing to be earned. These moments create emotional space where she can be vulnerable without fear. And in that space, physical closeness becomes meaningful, even rejuvenating. Unfortunately, many men are taught to view intimacy through a different lens. They may believe that expressing love means providing for the household, solving problems efficiently, or initiating physical closeness when the time feels right. And while those actions do matter, they are not the foundation of desire for a woman. Desire for her begins not in the body but in the heart, and more precisely, in how her heart feels when it is near yours. This difference in emotional language is why confusion often arises. A man may wonder why his partner, who once expressed warmth and affection so freely, now seems distant or uninterested. He may assume it's due to age, hormones, or fading attraction. In truth, it is more likely an emotional disconnection that has quietly taken root. When a woman begins to feel unappreciated, unnoticed, or emotionally dismissed, even unintentionally, it slowly chips away at her natural desire to connect physically. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, almost silently, until one day, intimacy feels more like a memory than a shared experience. Understanding this emotional pathway is not about blame, it is about awareness. It is about recognizing that desire cannot be summoned through pressure or performance, but through presence. A woman's heart opens when she feels emotionally safe. Her desire grows when she feels emotionally nourished, and her longing for physical closeness is rekindled not by a grand gesture, but by the comfort of being deeply understood. This truth is not a secret. It has been known by those who have walked through decades of life and love together. In fact, it was voiced with startling clarity by a 92-year-old woman who had lived through the full spectrum of love's seasons. Her words were simple, yet powerful. A woman gives her heart and her body fully when she feels cherished, protected, and emotionally secure. Let us keep this wisdom in mind as we continue exploring the quiet yet powerful forces that shape intimacy in long-term relationships. Because once this emotional foundation is restored, everything else, from affection to passion, begins to return with quiet strength. Throughout history, much of what society has told us about intimacy has been filtered through a narrow, often misleading lens. One that treats desire as primarily physical and frequently overlooks the emotional nuances that drive true connection. These cultural myths, passed down through generations, have shaped how men and women understand each other and often how they misunderstand one another. One of the most persistent myths is that attraction is maintained through physical appearance or performance. Men, in particular, are led to believe that being desirable means looking younger, staying fit, or being skilled in bed. While self-care and attentiveness do matter, they are not the root cause of lasting intimacy in a relationship, especially not for women. What truly nourishes a woman's desire is emotional resonance. It is not about how a man looks, but how she feels in his presence. Does she feel emotionally safe? Does she feel understood? Does she feel that her thoughts, emotions, and efforts are acknowledged and valued? This emotional landscape matters far more than physical traits. In fact, studies in relationship psychology consistently show that emotional attunement, the ability to recognize, respond to, and validate your partner's emotional state, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term satisfaction and intimacy. Yet, cultural conditioning often leads men to prioritize problem-solving over emotional presence. When something feels off in the relationship, many men instinctively try to fix it with tangible actions, offering solutions, suggesting a romantic weekend, or initiating physical affection. But if emotional disconnection has taken root, these efforts may be met with lukewarm responses or resistance. not because they are wrong, but because they are arriving in the wrong emotional sequence. Emotional disconnection cannot be repaired with a single gesture. It requires presence, genuine, consistent, and patient presence. A woman doesn't want to be won back through performance. She wants to feel safe enough to let her emotional guard down. That safety cannot be rushed or engineered. It must be nurtured. Another myth is that female desire diminishes naturally with age. While hormonal changes do play a role in physical function, the desire for closeness and affection does not simply disappear in later life. In truth, many women experience a renewed sense of emotional clarity and confidence as they grow older. If their relationship is emotionally secure, intimacy can continue and even deepen with time. The challenge, then, is not age. It is emotional distance. It is important to address these misunderstandings with kindness, not criticism. Most men are not intentionally neglecting their partner's emotional world. Rather, they have not been taught how deeply it matters, nor how to respond to it effectively. Emotional intelligence was not a core part of many men's upbringing. It was not modeled in their fathers, nor expected in their youth. But growth is always possible. At any age, the most loving relationships are not those where people never make mistakes, but those where both partners learn to see each other more clearly over time. Understanding female desire, then, begins with recognizing that intimacy is not a transaction to be earned. It is a reflection of how emotionally aligned two people feel. If that alignment is missing, physical affection becomes strained. But when emotional understanding is restored, desire follows naturally. Not out of obligation, but out of authentic connection. The path forward is not complicated. It simply requires a shift in focus, from trying to impress to trying to understand, from effort to empathy, from performance to presence. This is where real intimacy begins, not in the body, but in the quiet, emotional space between two people who feel safe enough to be fully themselves and who choose to keep seeing one another even after many years together. In the early stages of a relationship, intimacy often comes easily. There's curiosity, excitement, and the joy of discovering someone new. Every gesture feels meaningful. Every touch carries the thrill of connection. Emotional presence is natural because both partners are actively engaged in learning each other. But over time, something begins to shift. Life becomes fuller, more demanding. Work, responsibilities, health concerns, or family obligations begin to take up more space. What was once effortless affection gradually becomes a lower priority. It doesn't vanish all at once. Instead, it quietly slips into the background, and before either partner realizes it, emotional closeness begins to fade. This is not about blame. It is about human nature. We tend to nurture what is urgent and assume that what feels secure will take care of itself. In the case of a long-term relationship, the danger lies in assuming that love is self-sustaining, that once a commitment is made, intimacy will simply follow. But emotional connection does not run on autopilot. It requires attention, not just during hard times, but even more so during the calm, ordinary days, when everything seems fine. For many men, this fading of intimacy comes as a surprise. They look back and remember the woman who once greeted them with warmth, reached for their hand without prompting, or whispered kind words just before sleep. Now she seems more distant, less affectionate, even indifferent at times. It can be confusing and deeply discouraging. But the root of this change is often far more subtle than most people realize. What's happening is not necessarily a loss of love, it's a loss of emotional visibility. She may still love deeply, but if she no longer feels emotionally seen or appreciated, her natural desire to express closeness becomes dimmed. Over time, emotional disconnection settles in, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet drift. This drift begins with small, missed moments, the absence of a warm thank you, a lack of genuine interest in her feelings, a distracted response when she shares something meaningful. None of these things are meant to hurt. They simply reflect the growing influence of habit, routine, and emotional fatigue. Unfortunately, when this emotional gap widens, physical intimacy is usually the first thing to suffer. She may stop initiating touch. Her responses to affection may feel lukewarm, or she may withdraw altogether, not as punishment, but as a protective instinct. When emotional safety fades, so does her comfort in being physically vulnerable. This can be difficult to witness, especially for men who feel they are doing their best. Many ask themselves, "What did I do wrong?" Or, "Is she just not interested in me anymore?" These questions often lead to frustration and sometimes even resentment. But the better question is, when was the last time she truly felt emotionally close to me? Emotional closeness isn't maintained by accident. It is built on repeated, intentional moments of presence. And while both partners play a role, the most significant changes often begin when one person chooses to show up differently, with more attention, more gentleness, and more curiosity. It is also important to note that intimacy doesn't disappear simply because of age. While physical energy may change with time, the emotional need for connection remains just as strong. In fact, older couples who sustain physical affection often do so because they have preserved the emotional thread that keeps their bond alive. If that thread feels frayed now, know that it can be repaired. The fading of intimacy is not a final verdict. It is a signal, a quiet call for deeper attention. And when that call is answered with love and consistency, intimacy can return. Sometimes more slowly than before, but often with greater depth. The secret lies in recognizing that emotional connection is not one grand event. It is made up of small, consistent gestures that say, "I see you, I care, you still matter." Emotional disconnection rarely begins with an argument. More often it begins in silence, in the quiet spaces where a woman starts to feel unnoticed, unappreciated, or emotionally alone. Unlike physical distance, which is easy to observe, emotional distance is subtle. It builds slowly, often unnoticed, until one day the warmth that once defined the relationship feels strangely out of reach. Many men do not see the signs at first. They may still be providing for the household, fulfilling responsibilities, or maintaining routines. But emotional presence is not the same as physical presence. Being in the same room does not always mean being emotionally available, and for women, this difference matters deeply. A woman may continue to care, she may continue to serve, to listen, even to smile, but something inside her starts to retreat when she feels emotionally invisible. She may no longer feel safe expressing herself openly. She may hesitate to initiate affection. Over time, she becomes less responsive, not because she has stopped loving, but because her emotional needs have gone unmet for too long. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in long-term relationships. To the man, everything may appear functional. The bills are paid, the routines are followed, conversations still happen, but to the woman, something is missing, something essential. The sense that she matters, not just as a partner or a mother or a homemaker, but as a woman, a human being with feelings, desires, and dreams that still need to be nurtured. What makes this so challenging is that women often do not express this emotional withdrawal in direct language. Many are not taught or do not feel safe enough to say, "I feel emotionally abandoned," or "I no longer feel cherished." Instead, they withdraw gently, quietly, hoping their partner will notice, hoping he will care enough to ask not just what's wrong, but how she truly feels. When that emotional gap remains unaddressed, the physical side of the relationship begins to suffer. Intimacy, once natural, becomes strained or infrequent. A man may interpret this change as a rejection or assume it's due to aging, but often it's the outward symptom of a deeper issue, the heart's quiet retreat from a relationship that no longer feels emotionally safe. It is not that women want constant attention or reassurance. What they want is to be emotionally met, to feel that their inner world matters to their partner, that their thoughts, moods, and emotional rhythms are noticed and cared for, not just occasionally, but consistently. This consistency is what builds emotional security, and emotional security is what fuels lasting desire. To rebuild this connection, one must begin by noticing not just what she does, but how she feels. Has her laughter become less frequent? Has she stopped sharing her day in detail? Does she seem hesitant when you initiate affection, or quickly turn her attention elsewhere? These are not signs of rejection. They are signs of emotional need, and they are reversible. The moment a woman begins to feel emotionally seen again, her heart begins to soften. Her willingness to engage physically, emotionally, affectionately returns. Not because she is being persuaded or pressured, but because she feels safe again. Emotional safety is not a dramatic concept. It is built through quiet moments of genuine interest. It is maintained by listening without judgment, by remembering small details, by offering warmth even when words are few. The heart, after all, does not shut down overnight, and it can be reopened, but only through care. Not effort in the traditional sense, but a kind of emotional presence that says, "I still choose you," every day. Not just because we share a life, but because your inner world still matters to me. This is the beginning of true reconnection, not through performance or persuasion, but through the gentle act of truly seeing her again, not as a task or responsibility, but as the woman you once knew and still love. Wisdom gathered across a lifetime often carries a different weight, calmer, quieter, but no less powerful. It is not theoretical nor hurried. It comes from living through decades of change, of shared triumphs and silent disappointments, of love that was tested, reshaped, and ultimately endured. When a 92-year-old woman speaks about intimacy, people tend to listen, not because of her age alone, but because she speaks from lived truth. Her words are not wrapped in modern jargon or psychological terms. They are plain, measured, earned. A woman gives her heart and her body fully, she said, when she feels cherished, protected, and emotionally secure. This single sentence contains what many relationship books take hundreds of pages to explain. It captures the essence of what makes intimacy last, not for a year or a season, but for a lifetime. She went on to explain that love is not something you win once and keep without effort. It is something you keep choosing, and intimacy is not a byproduct of time spent together, but a reflection of how two people continue to show up for one another, even after familiarity sets in, even after life becomes heavy, even after words become fewer. She spoke of how in her early marriage, physical affection came easily. There was energy, curiosity, and the joy of simply being together. But as the years passed, real love had to go deeper. When her husband stopped complimenting her, she didn't stop loving him, but she started to feel invisible. When he stopped asking how she felt, she didn't grow cold overnight, but she started to close herself off, little by little. The turning point, she said, came not when he planned a vacation or brought home flowers, but when he simply noticed. He looked at her one evening and asked, "Are we okay? You've seemed far away lately." And instead of brushing her feelings aside, he sat with them, he listened. He didn't defend or explain. He just stayed present. That small shift reopened a door that had quietly been closing. She explained that what rekindled her desire wasn't romance in the traditional sense. It was the return of emotional safety. It was knowing she could once again speak and be heard, feel and be held. That, for her, made the difference between a touch that felt obligatory and a touch that felt wanted. Her story offers more than nostalgia. It offers a model. Because what she discovered over a lifetime is that intimacy is not sustained by grand declarations, nor by trying harder to impress. It is sustained by the willingness to remain emotionally present, to continue discovering each other, even when there seems to be nothing new to find. She urged that the emotional world of a woman does not close because of age. If anything, it deepens. But with that depth comes the need for reassurance, not in words alone, but in gestures, in tone, in consistency. She said, "A woman may age on the outside, but her need to feel seen never goes away." This is a truth that many forget. They look at aging couples and assume the passion is gone. But passion, she reminded us, is not about youth. It is about connection. And connection is timeless if tended to with care. Her words serve as both caution and encouragement. Caution because neglecting emotional connection will always lead to distance, no matter how long two people have loved each other. Encouragement because no matter how distant things have become, the path back is always through presence, through empathy, through choosing again. She didn't speak as an expert, she spoke as someone who had stayed, who had grown, who had rediscovered love not once but many times, with the same person, in different seasons of life. So we carry her wisdom forward, not as a romantic ideal, but as a practical guide. When intimacy fades, return to presence. When connection feels lost, return to listening. When love feels dull, remember, the heart softens again when it feels safe. Every relationship faces seasons of distance. What determines whether love endures is not whether these seasons occur, they will, but whether both partners find a path back to one another. In many cases, the first step toward reconnection is not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet realization. Something has changed, and we must choose to change with it. One man shared that after 30 years of marriage, his home had grown quiet. His wife, once expressive and affectionate, now seemed distant. She no longer reached for his hand, her voice lacked warmth, and the lightness in her eyes had dimmed. At first, he told himself it was simply aging. This is what happens, he thought. You grow older and the spark fades. But deep down, he felt the emptiness too. One day, during a walk in their neighborhood, he turned to her and said softly, "I miss us." Those 3 words, unguarded, humble, sincere, were enough to open a door that had long been closed. She paused, looked at him, and nodded, not with words, but with the kind of silence that holds emotion. That evening, they sat on the porch and spoke, not about tasks, not about schedules, but about feelings. It wasn't an instant repair, but it was a beginning. Another man in his 60s described a similar awakening. His wife had grown increasingly withdrawn, and he couldn't understand why. He had never stopped working hard. He provided, he stayed faithful, he avoided conflict, but something in her had quietly turned away. He only realized the depth of the distance when she stopped initiating touch altogether. One evening, instead of asking for affection, he asked her a question he hadn't asked in years. Is there something you need that I've stopped giving? At first, she didn't answer, but the next day, she left a note on the kitchen counter. It read, I miss feeling like I matter, like I'm more than the person who keeps things running. I want to be your partner again, not just your helper. That note changed everything. He began doing small things, not grand gestures, but deliberate acts of attention. He looked her in the eye when she spoke. He asked about her day and really listened. He offered affection, not tied to expectation. Gradually, she softened. Her laughter returned. So did her affection. He later said, we found each other again, not through trying harder, but through learning to pay attention. These stories are not rare, they are not dramatic, but they reveal something universal. Emotional distance does not have to be permanent. What begins in silence can be answered in presence. What grows cold through neglect can be warmed again through care. The common thread in these stories is not perfection, it is humility, a willingness to see not only where your partner has changed, but where you have stopped showing up, and then to return not with apologies alone, but with presence, with effort that speaks, you still matter to me. What these couples rediscovered was that intimacy is not a reward. It is not a negotiation, it is a response. When a woman feels emotionally seen, her desire returns, not because she is fulfilling a duty, but because she feels connected again. Desire that flows from connection lasts. It does not need to be chased. It returns gently when the heart feels safe. Let these stories serve not only as inspiration, but as instruction. Emotional closeness is not lost in one moment. It is lost in the absence of many small moments. And it is regained the same way, not through urgency, but through consistent, quiet. The most enduring relationships are not built on constant effort or grand romantic gestures. They are built on small, consistent actions that accumulate over time, forming an emotional foundation strong enough to support physical intimacy, even decades into a partnership. When emotional closeness fades, many men respond with frustration. Some try to fix things by planning a date night or offering compliments. Others pull away, believing their partner has simply lost interest. But the real solution is not found in dramatic interventions. It is found in the daily moments that make a woman feel emotionally safe, valued, and truly seen. There are 3 habits in particular that, when practiced consistently, can reignite emotional connection and naturally lead to renewed desire. These are not complicated. They do not require perfect words or expensive gifts. What they require is presence, intention, and a willingness to care in small but meaningful ways. The first habit is intentional words, speaking to her heart, not just her ears. Many men believe their partner knows she is loved because they said it once or because they show it through action. But words carry emotional weight, especially when they are specific and heartfelt. Instead of general compliments, speak with depth. and attention. Say, "I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about something you care about," or "The way you handled that situation today, I saw your strength and I admire it." These are not lines. They are observations that say, "I see you, I notice you, you still move me." Words like these reach beneath the surface and create emotional warmth. They say to her that she is not just part of your routine, but part of your emotional world, that she is still capable of being admired, appreciated, and desired, not just for what she does, but for who she is. The second habit is non-goal-oriented touch affection that is given freely without expectation of more. One of the reasons intimacy fades in long-term relationships is that physical affection becomes tied to a goal. A kiss is given when one hopes it will lead to something more. A hug is offered as a precursor to deeper intimacy. Over time, this pattern can make a woman feel as if every touch is conditional. Instead, begin rebuilding the bridge through touch that expects nothing in return. A gentle hand on her back as you walk past, holding her hand during a quiet moment. A kiss on the forehead while she's reading or cooking. These moments communicate, "I want to be close to you." Just because. Women can feel the difference between affection that carries pressure and affection that is freely given. When she begins to feel cherished in the small gestures, her comfort with physical closeness naturally begins to return. It is not forced. It is felt. The third habit is consistent emotional presence, showing up in the little things. Women rarely fall out of love because of one major event. They fall out of emotional closeness because of the steady absence of small affirmations. When a man stops checking in, stops remembering, stops noticing, over time this creates a quiet loneliness, even in a shared life. But the opposite is also true. When a man begins to show up again in small, reliable ways, the emotional atmosphere shifts. Asking how she slept, refilling her coffee before she asks, remembering something she said last week and following up. These gestures may seem simple, but to her they say, "You are not forgotten. I am still paying attention." Consistency in these moments creates emotional safety. It tells her that she is not alone in the relationship, that her presence is valued, that she is still worth noticing. Together, these three habits, intentional words, non-goal-oriented touch, and consistent emotional presence, begin to rebuild the bridge between emotional closeness and physical desire, not through pressure, not through strategy, but through care. When a woman feels emotionally secure, she does not have to choose to be intimate. Her desire arises naturally because it is rooted in connection, and connection, once restored, opens the door to all the warmth, tenderness, and closeness that seem to have faded. These daily habits are not tasks to be completed. They are invitations to remember, to return, and to rediscover what brought you together in the first place. In many relationships, one of the most overlooked yet powerful tools for restoring intimacy is listening. Not the kind of listening that waits for a turn to speak, not the type that jumps to solve a problem or defend a position, but the kind that receives without resistance, that listens not just to the words, but to the feelings behind them. This kind of listening is rare, and yet it is exactly what women long for, especially in long-term partnerships where emotional closeness has begun to wane. At its core, listening is not about agreement. It is about presence. It is the act of saying, "You matter enough for me to pause. to hear you fully, and to sit with what you feel, even if it's uncomfortable. When a woman feels deeply heard, something in her begins to soften. Her emotional guard lowers, her heart opens, not because it has been convinced, but because it has been received. There's a story of a man named Mark who had been married to his wife, Lisa, for nearly 25 years. Over time, he began to notice that Lisa was pulling away. She was quieter, less affectionate. She no longer touched him in passing or leaned into him while they watched television. At first, he responded the way many do. He grew frustrated. He offered to take her out to dinner. He bought her a gift. He even cleaned the kitchen, hoping the gesture would mean something. But none of these actions created the response he hoped for. Eventually, one evening, he turned to her and said, "I know I've been missing something. I want to understand. Can you tell me what's been on your mind?" What followed wasn't an argument. It wasn't even emotional at first. It was quiet. Lisa hesitated, then began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "I don't feel like you really see me anymore. I don't feel like my thoughts matter. I feel like I've become part of the background." Mark wanted to respond, to reassure her, to explain how busy he'd been, but instead he stayed quiet. He nodded, he placed his hand over hers and said only, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." And that moment, so small yet so real, began to change everything. Lisa didn't suddenly become affectionate again overnight, but the door opened. She started to share more. He began to listen differently, not to solve, not to correct, but simply to understand. And in that emotional space, her affection gradually returned, not because he asked for it, but because she felt connected again. Listening, when done well, is an act of emotional generosity. It tells your partner, "I'm still curious about you. You are still worth understanding." This, more than anything, restores emotional safety. And emotional safety is the true foundation of physical intimacy. In long-term relationships, familiarity can breed assumption. We stop asking questions because we think we already know the answers. We stop listening deeply because we assume we've heard it all before. But people change, emotions evolve. And when we stop being curious, we stop being close. Reignite your curiosity. Ask her how she's really feeling, not just today, but in this season of life. Ask her what she's been missing or what she wishes you noticed more. And then listen. Don't correct, don't explain, just listen. You may be surprised by what you hear. You may feel sadness or even guilt. But more importantly, you'll feel connection. Because your presence in that moment, your willingness to simply hold her words, is what she has been longing for. Not perfection, not solutions, but you. When a woman feels truly understood, her heart begins to open again. And when her heart opens, physical closeness flows, not as an obligation, but as a natural expression of trust and emotional warmth. Listening is not a skill reserved for counselors or poets. It is something anyone can practice, and it may be the most powerful thing you do to bring life back into your relationship, not by changing her, but by making space for her to be herself fully and without fear. When people speak of attraction, they often focus on the visible, the way someone looks, how they behave, or how exciting the relationship feels in its early stages. But the invisible force that holds two people together over decades is something less talked about, yet far more powerful: emotional safety. Emotional safety is not flashy. It doesn't draw attention to itself. But without it, desire cannot grow. And with it, even aging relationships can rediscover a sense of warmth, closeness, and passion that many believe is lost to time. For women especially, emotional safety is the doorway through which physical intimacy enters. It is the quiet assurance that says, I can let down my guard, I can be myself. I won't be judged, dismissed, or made to feel invisible. Without this assurance, even the most well-meaning gestures of affection may fall flat. But when emotional safety is present, her heart opens, and with it, her desire to be physically close. What does emotional safety look like in practice? It looks like a man who is consistent, not just in action, but in tone, who doesn't use sarcasm when his partner is vulnerable, who doesn't rush to dismiss her fears or downplay her concerns. It looks like patience in the face of emotional moments, a soft hand held out instead of a sharp word. It looks like small reassurances given without being asked for. One woman shared that she didn't lose her desire for intimacy because of age or stress, but because she no longer felt emotionally protected. Her partner had grown impatient, distracted, and reactive. Even minor conversations felt unsafe. Over time, she began to withdraw, not because she stopped loving him, but because her nervous system no longer felt relaxed in his presence. When she tried to express this, he was surprised. He hadn't realized how much his tone, his distracted listening, or his frequent corrections had been affecting her emotionally. From his perspective, he was just being honest, but from hers, the space between them no longer felt safe. It's a critical lesson. Emotional safety isn't only about what we say, it's about how we say it and how we respond to each other's emotional world. Neuroscience supports this truth. When a person feels emotionally threatened, the body shifts into a protective state. This can happen with raised voices, criticism, or even repeated interruptions. The result? Physical closeness becomes harder, not because the affection is unwanted, but because the body is too guarded to receive it. But the good news is that the opposite is also true. When emotional safety is rebuilt, when she feels heard, respected, and emotionally held, her body begins to relax. Trust returns. Her nervous system moves out of defense and into connection. And in that state, desire begins to reemerge, not as a response to pressure, but as a response to peace. That's why small, consistent efforts to create safety matter so deeply. Not just in times of conflict, but every day. It's in how you greet her in the morning, how you respond when she's upset, how you treat her opinions, how you honor her vulnerability, even when it's hard to hear. It is also about the absence of pressure. When physical affection is expected or implied as a reward for kindness, the sense of safety begins to erode. But when affection is offered without demand, when kindness is its own reward, trust begins to rebuild. She begins to believe again that your touch comes not from need but from love, that your attention is not a strategy but a gift, and that your presence is not a performance but a genuine desire to be near her. Emotional safety is not created overnight. It is formed through repeated moments of kindness, respect, and care, and it is rebuilt in the same way. But once it is present, it changes everything. Because when a woman feels safe emotionally and spiritually, her heart opens, her body follows, and what may have felt like a fading flame is revealed instead to be a fire waiting for air. Every long-term relationship carries with it a kind of story, woven not just from memories and milestones, but from daily habits, unspoken feelings, and the rhythm of emotional exchange. This story is not static, it evolves, and in many cases it drifts off course, not because either person intended harm, but because time has a way of dulling attentiveness when we stop paying close attention. But here is the truth. that story can be rewritten. You don't need a crisis or a dramatic event to begin again. You only need the willingness to see your partner with new eyes and to choose, consciously, to write a new chapter, one where emotional connection is not left to chance, but nurtured by design. Start by asking yourself this: what does she experience in my presence each day? Does she feel seen when she walks into the room? Does she sense that her words carry weight when she expresses emotion, joy, stress, uncertainty? Does she find a space to land, or does she feel alone with her thoughts? These questions are not meant to shame, they are meant to guide. Because when we begin to examine the emotional climate we help create, we start to realize just how much power we hold to shift it. You may be surprised at how quickly small changes yield real results. Begin a new habit of checking in, gently, sincerely, without agenda. How's your heart today? Is a simple question that invites vulnerability. If she's quiet, let that be okay. Don't press, don't fix, just listen. Reintroduce physical affection without the expectation of more. A kiss on the top of her head, a hand resting on her back. Let her body relearn what it feels like to be touched with tenderness rather than pressure. Acknowledge her contributions, not just the big ones, but the often invisible acts that keep the household and your shared life flowing. Say thank you and mean it. Gratitude creates warmth. Warmth builds safety, and safety fuels closeness. Revisit shared memories. Remind her of a time you laughed together or a moment when you felt proud of her. This helps reawaken emotional intimacy by affirming your shared foundation. Even your tone, so often overlooked, can become a powerful tool for reconnection. Speak with gentleness. Let your voice carry respect and care, especially when she is vulnerable. The body remembers tone. And when that tone is warm, her defenses soften. And most of all, stay consistent. One kind moment may feel nice, but emotional security grows when that kindness continues. When she knows, with quiet certainty, that your attentiveness today isn't a performance, but a pattern. Remember, rewriting your love story does not mean erasing the past. It means building on it, acknowledging where you've drifted, and choosing, with humility, to draw closer again. You are not too far gone. It is not too late. No matter how much distance has crept in, no matter how emotionally cold things have become, the path back is always available to those willing to take the first step. And perhaps in doing so, you will both come to see that love, in its most enduring form, is not about how closely you held each other in the beginning, but about how fiercely you chose to return to each other again and again in the quiet middle of life. As we reach the end of this journey, let us pause and reflect, not with urgency, but with calm understanding. You have not been asked to become someone new. You have not been told to perform, impress, or outdo yourself in romantic invention. Instead, you've been invited to return to something more honest, more human, and ultimately more sustainable: emotional clarity. Because when a woman feels emotionally safe, seen, and valued, intimacy no longer has to be requested. It becomes something she desires, not out of obligation, but from deep internal longing. This desire doesn't come from grand gestures or surface-level attraction. It comes from presence, from trust, from the feeling that she is loved, not just as a partner or a figure in your life, but as the person she truly is. We have spoken about the silent drift that happens in long-term relationships, the emotional gap that widens through neglect even when love still exists. We've explored how women often withdraw, not because they've stopped loving, but because they no longer feel emotionally safe. We've looked at the myths that confuse physical attraction with emotional connection, and we've offered practical ways through intentional words, non-demanding touch, genuine listening, and small daily care to rebuild that bridge. And through it all, one truth remains steady. What she truly longs for is not a perfect partner, but a present one. You don't have to be younger, richer, or more exciting to make her feel desired. You only need to be emotionally available, gentle with her heart, and consistent in your attention. When that becomes your way of being, everything else, touch, closeness, affection, begins to flow again, naturally, effortlessly. Let us also remember the voice of the wise 92-year-old woman who offered her lifetime of insight in one powerful sentence. A woman gives her heart and her body fully when she feels cherished, protected, and emotionally secure. Let that be your guide. If you've felt disconnected, begin again. Not with big declarations, but with small, consistent moments of care. If your partner has gone quiet, sit beside her and simply ask, "How are you really feeling?" And if your intimacy has faded, remember, it's not gone. It's waiting for safety, tenderness, and the invitation to return. You have the ability to create that invitation. So now, as you step back into your daily life, ask yourself, not what should I do next, but how can I make her feel emotionally safe today? The answer to that question will become the foundation of your renewed connection. And in that space, the most meaningful form of intimacy will rise again, quietly, surely, and with the strength that only emotional clarity can bring.